Brian, go ahead and take it from here, please.
You're not muted.
Okay, so thank you again for being here. I just wanted to introduce our project team. So Matt Noonkester just introduced himself. Thank you, Matt. Also on the call is Riley Timmons with City Explained, our project consultants. And if each of our staff could just give a wave when I speak your name. Also on the call here is Amy Gowan, our director, myself, the deputy director, Mary Kendall, our other deputy director, Jeff Bruno, chief for the Division of Research, Kate Bollinger, community planner, and Sarah Latimer, another community planner with our department. Also on the call, I hope, is Tim Rogers, manager for school planning with Howard County Public School System, and Dan Lubley, director of capital planning and construction. And this group will be your sort of guide for the next few meetings. So the focus of tonight's discussion is, again, a general introduction to HoCo by Design, which is our general plan in the process, and to yourselves, the SAG members, followed by a definition of our SAG process and goals, then a presentation on school planning, followed by the topics that the SAG will cover and any additional data that this group would like to see for purposes of their deliberation, and closing with future meeting schedule discussion. We just want to nail down exactly when we're planning to meet on those dates. So, an introduction, HoCo by Design. I'm going to let Matt take it from here.
Sure, great. Next slide, please. Again, we've come together as a strategic advisory group under the umbrella of a general plan, and this one's being branded HoCo by Design. So it's the HoCo by Design general plan, for which we've been working on for over a year now. And it's obviously a big and broad effort. And we've convened this group as well as one on the environment and housing to help us really dive in deeply to uncover some new ideas, issues, opportunities that can help move forward the general plan. But the general plan itself is one of those few opportunities that the county has to really think broad about its future and look at all the different topics at one time. And so you see on the slide things like transportation or housing and the environment and character and all those kind of things. We get to look at all of them simultaneously and look at sort of the push and pull relationship between some of the actions we might take in any one area and what does that mean for the others. But it also means that we don't go into the greatest detail in any one topic as part of the general plan. And so in many ways, the general plan sets up additional studies that are done in later years in order to implement some of these ideas. So again, the general plan is about either reaffirming or making some course correction to the vision for growth, development, and conservation for Howard County. It's looking at all kinds of topics in one document, which is its advantage, but it will have some further studies, plans, ordinances, and things that will be done after the fact in order to fully implement the vision. This is not the first time that the county has done this. You're now, I guess, going on your seventh round of a general plan update. They are reviewed and updated regularly, and that's just to keep up with changing market trends, different demographic preferences, different land use decisions, the cumulative effect of different land use decisions, infrastructure investments, and the like. And so as we're going through this, we're really focused obviously on land development or conservation. We're looking at now things like redevelopment, and you see there certain corridors or locations within the county of interest. But we're also looking not just at growth, but also at the other side, which is the conservation and preservation. And then looking at how you serve development moving forward, for which this advisory group is one of those topics to look at in terms of how do we provide the necessary capital, the capacity in the right place and of the right size in order to accommodate existing and future development pressures. And then also, if you even take 3-4 steps back and you're looking at the county as a whole and how it does its business, the general plan that you see on the left-hand side of this graphic is really kind of the headwaters. It's really upstream and affects just about everything the county does moving forward. And so whether it's the annual or capital budgets that are being considered, whether it's for the county itself or the school district, the general plan can have influence on that because of where growth is going. Also, any amendments that are done have to obviously go through a process similar to what we're doing right now. There may be one or more different, more focused plans. They call them functional plans that might be look at transportation or school strategic planning or a housing study, all kinds of more specific honed in plans that take root from what happens in the general plan. You also see that all the different regulations and things that you may come to experience within Howard County have their roots in the general plan, whether it has to do with land development or whether it has to do with zoning. And then everything that comes off of those two processes as well really owes its roots back to the general plan. So again, this is an awesome opportunity because we really get to look at things and how they'll impact 3, 4, or 5 steps down the road when we're looking at what we're doing for this plan specifically. It's also important to acknowledge kind of what drives change within a community. And, a lot of people all say, what is Howard County doing about this? Or what can we do about this? And we need to acknowledge when we go into our planning process with eyes wide open that the government is only one entity that actually either creates change or protects conditions as they are today. So we have to honor and respect those property rights for those who own the land. We have to look at different market trends and what that's bringing to you as opportunities or maybe as challenges. We have obviously what you can do as a local government. So that's your plans, your ordinances, how you earmark or allocate funding. But then you have to have certain developers who want to build that type of development. And so we have to get their interest as well before something can happen. And then believe it or not, so much might depend on just the lending community. Sometimes developers or property owners want to do something, but they just can't get the financing to do it. And so it's only when these kind of 5 entities come together that you actually see the fruits of the labor that come out of the general plan. And so we need to acknowledge these things when we're having our discussions. And as I mentioned, this is sort of your 7th general plan, if I counted right. But this one's going to be like no other. You're starting to get to a point where you're having to have different discussions within the county. Here you see this is a capture from our land use assessment that was done, and this is on our HoCo by Design project website if you want to learn more. But as you look at just the existing conditions for land use and development within the county, it's about 2% of your land that's left that is vacant, unprotected, and greenfield. And so in many ways, we're talking more about redevelopment. We're talking about maybe having to do things differently. It might be harder to find that next school site that needs 10, 20, 30, 40 acres kind of thing. And so we're going to have to really think out of the box a little bit as we look forward 20 more years for Howard County's future, because the way you were doing business before can't always occur or continue because we're running out of land. Now, while we're running out of land, there is no shortage in desire to come to Howard County. And we did a market assessment and looked at different trends, and we looked at the region, and we looked at your proximity within the region. And we looked at it in kind of 3 main buckets. And so from a housing perspective, there's projected demand over the next 20 years to see another 31,000 units come. Now, obviously, the question is, can they make it here? Can they fit here? Is there capacity? What type? Those kind of things. But when you're looking at pure demand, there's the guess that there could be up to 30,000 more units coming. And even then, when we did more research, we said, you know what? Because there's been kind of a pent up demand where there's been more demand that has not been able to be met by your supply. There's even 20,000 more on top of that who would love to come to Howard County. We just don't see a way they can right now. So lots of demand in terms of housing. And then you also see in terms of jobs and retail, a lot more demand also anticipated for the 20-year horizon. Obviously, the housing is really important to this group because new housing creates new students, or people moving into existing housing can create new students. So we have to really think about the housing perspective for you all. And then some of you may have participated, but I didn't want to take for granted. We had what was called a Growth Choices workshop that occurred in March and into April. And as part of that, we contemplated different futures for the county. And so while we showed you in that last slide that there could be up to 30,000 new units coming, we kind of asked the question, well, what if that many don't come? What if more come? Where do they go? What do they look like? And we put out different options for the community to react to. And again, it was part of what was called our Growth Choices workshop. We got a lot of great feedback from that. We're summarizing it right now and starting to share it with our stakeholders. And that'll be up on the website as well. But we just kind of looked at different ways the county might grow, how it might prepare for that growth, and what did people feel about it. What was really interesting, we had kind of 8 real important or key decision points that we posted as part of these different choices that were out there. And one of them was about growth and the attitudes towards growth and development in the county moving forward. And I wanted to share with you here, just because obviously schools is a big issue. We're learning that as an outside consultant. We just hear it all the time, and we know you know it much more than we do. But when you look at this question about growth and development in the county, you saw that there's a mixed bag of reactions and attitudes towards growth moving forward. There's a sizable amount of people who are just opposed to it. They'd like to see it stop or slow. We have to recognize and honor that there are other viewpoints as well. And you see the middle viewpoint there actually got the highest ranking back in terms of an answer, which was cautiously optimistic about growth as long as we can have the infrastructure in place to support it. And then you see there's also a sizable amount of people who just, they recognize, at least in their world and their opinions, that growth is good no matter what. And so we have the demand for growth that I showed you a few slides ago. We see some opinions about, while growth can be hard and difficult, we do recognize, or the community recognizes, that there are some direct benefits that come from that. And so this group, we really want to brainstorm and deal with, well, how to grow, when to grow, solutions for growth in terms of schools. So I mentioned we're kind of well into our process, but there's a tremendous amount of work still to go. We actually started back in January of 2020. We had what were called our general guidelines. Our kind of official go was in July of 2020. And we've been going 1,000 miles an hour ever since then. And so as part of this process, we are now in our sort of spring to summer months, where we're taking a very big view about, well, how do we want to organize growth and development moving forward, and looking at the different infrastructure systems that are going to be needed to support it. That's a big process and a big ask. And so we have both our planning advisory committee, who is working with us, as well as these strategic advisory groups that are being formed and kicking off their meetings this week and next. Eventually, we'll bring your thoughts and ideas back to the group, and you'll have direct impact on what we're going to be writing for a draft general plan in the late summer months that you'll be able to see in the draft document released to the public. We are hoping to at least start the process late 2021, early 2022, to start the adoption process so this can start to be implemented right away. And just one more graphic here to show you as we overview the general plan. And this is sort of our approach. And we show this in just about every meeting that we have. And it's, how are we doing our work? How are we writing the plan? So we're taking very seriously community input, and that comes in all forms, whether it's a simple survey or a group like this convened to meet over several events. All of that input that we're taking is coming in and being kind of cataloged and summarized and categorized. We're also doing a tremendous amount of data and analysis that's going on in the background, and we're sharing that information as we get it. And then again, as you're kind of a county who is having new challenges being brought for you for this general plan, there are some best practices or lessons to be learned from others who have gone before you. And so we've been researching and studying that information as well. And so where community input and interest overlaps with data to support, or some ideas for best practices, you see that kind of center triangle. That's really where we're trying to write this report. And so that's where your input and the data we can get, as well as the best practices, will make this the strongest plan that we can develop for the county. So with that, Brian, let me give it back to you to go through introductions.
Thank you very much, Matt. Really appreciate that overview. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time tonight. I'd like to go around the horn and call each of you by name and ask you to introduce yourselves. We have a very sort of brief script here. My name is X, and my connection to or experience in public education is X. I live or work or own property in Howard County, and if applicable, I represent a particular organization. So with that said, I'd like to start with Miss Ellen Flynn Giles.
Okay. I was a member of the Board of Education for 3 terms. I currently serve on the Spending Affordability Committee for the county. I live in Howard County. I have a small consulting company and work downtown with Standard & Poor's. And that's me.
Thank you, Ellen. How about Larry Cohen? Larry, are you there?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm Larry Cohen, and I worked for the Howard County school system for 28 years and was a member of the Board of Education for 4 years, where I worked with my good friend Ellen Giles. So hi, Ellen. How you doing?
Hey there.
And I live in Howard County. My wife and I still live in Howard County. And I don't represent any organization. We own our house in Howard County. And I guess that's about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is Dr. Liu available?
Hi, my name is Yun Lu. I'm a current Howard County Board of Education member. My family live in Western Howard County. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Joel Gallahue here?
Yep. I used to work for Howard County Schools in school planning, and also Montgomery County Schools. Presently work for Harford County, and I thought I could get away from redistricting, but now I'm on their committee. So, I also live in Howard County, and my children, well, they're all grown up, but they went through Howard County Schools.
Thank you, Joel. How about James Cecil?
Hi everyone, I'm James Cecil. My connection is a parent of 2 children in the system, PTAC delegate, CAC member, and most recently served on the Policy 6010 Review Committee for HCPSS.
Thank you, James. And Steve Hunt?
Good afternoon, or I guess we're bleeding into the evening here. Steve Hunt. First of all, glad to be a part of this group. Thank you for the opportunity, especially happy to be able to catch up with old friends like Ellen and Joel. Hello, both of you guys. It's been a while. But again, my name's Steve Hunt. My connection to public education in Howard County, I have 2 kids in the system. I have also served on several HCPSS committees focused on redistricting. To my friend Joel, I think it's like the mafia. You know, once you thought you were out, but now you're back in. But I've enjoyed it, and I don't represent an organization. I'm just a Howard County resident that wants to be involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Michael Bayer?
Hello, I'm Michael Bayer. I actually work for the Maryland Department of Planning as the Manager of Infrastructure and Development. And about 40% of my job is working with the Interagency Commission on School Construction. I'm the IAC designee for the Department of Planning, working with Secretary McCord. Our office develops the enrollment projections for all the LEAs, and we also accept and review the educational facility master plans that work very closely with Howard County Schools. Been there since 2017. Actually, so I don't know if I'm actually representing MDP or the state on this, because I was asked to participate. Did actually work in Columbia as a consultant in planning from 2001 to 2005 with the late Jane Damner, for those of you who know her or knew her, and also worked, of course, with Mary Kendall, Jeff, and Joel in various capacities.
Thank you, Michael. Is Pratima Lele here?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, little lag time. Yes, hi, my name is Pratima Lele, and my connection is that I'm the current chair of the Community Advisory Council Committee to the Board of Education, and I've been the chair for the past 2 years and vice chair prior to that. And I've had some experience on some of the policy committees related to the educational system. I also have 2 young kids. One is in the system, the other one is not yet. And I live in Howard County and I work in Rockville as an attorney representing the mortgage industry.
Thank you, Pratima. And last but not least, Elizabeth Homan.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Homan, and I attended elementary and high school here in Howard County, attended Howard Community College. I now work at Howard Community College, and I also am the chair of the Howard County Housing Commission.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you all again for volunteering your time. We really appreciate it. Without further ado, we're going to keep our agenda rolling and talk about the process and goals for this group. So we have 3 goals for this SAG group. One is to convene a multidisciplinary group of experts to analyze and discuss the current state of school planning and growth. For you all to collaboratively consider possible improvements to policy and process, and to summarize your findings and conclusions to be released to the Planning Advisory Committee and to the public for further consideration as part of our overall general plan process. And we'll be moving on now to Jeff Brona. I'm going to let Jeff take over the controls here, and Tim Rogers will also be presenting.
Thank you, Brian. So let me, Matt, do I have the share screen ability? Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's see here.
Jeff, we're seeing.
All right, thank you, Brian.
Jeff, we're seeing the
seeing
presenter view. Yeah, there we go.
Is that good? Okay. Okay, thanks, Brian. So my name is Jeff Brano. I'm the chief of the research division in the Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning, and helped put this report together. We sent the report to you on Friday evening. Have you all received that report? And I'm not sure if you've all had a chance to read it yet. We try to make it kind of a concise but very informative report on sort of an education piece on the ABCs of school planning. And so this presentation I'm going to be showing here really is a kind of a overview of that report. So if you haven't seen it or read it, then we certainly encourage you to read it. And the report is really talks about these 7 different aspects of school planning, and I'm going to go over each of those. Tim Rogers, manager of school planning with HCPSS, is also with me. He's also contributed to the report as well. So he's going to be talking about items 5 and 6, sources of student growth and school capacities in long-range planning. I'm going to start with roles and responsibilities, give an overview of Howard County's APFO, talk a little bit about recent residential growth trends, recent current impacts of APFO. There were some changes to APFO. Talk a little bit about that. And then Tim will talk about 5 and 6, as I indicated, and then end with a little bit on financing school construction. So first, to talk about roles and responsibilities, DPZ prepares a housing unit projections each fall, and we use September 30th as the starting point. So we get, we try to correspond that with the school system September 30th official enrollments and sort of the start of the school year. So we start with that annually, and we have a pretty good detailed inventory of plans and process, and we know what's in the pipeline. So we base on that. We also base it on the general plan projections to produce a 20-year projection, and we update that annually every September based on new information that comes in. We provide that to the school system in December. We also use these annual projections for other things besides school. We provide it to DPW for infrastructure planning, parks and recreation, et cetera. The projections are very detailed. They're at the parcel level. And so when we give it to the various agencies, including schools, they're able to fit it into their own planning paradigm. So in the case of schools, for example, They use school polygons, which some of you are familiar with, and so those feed into school districts. So they're able to take our data and really look at where growth is down to the detailed parcel level. Howard County Public School System, for their part in this process of school planning, they prepare a feasibility study, and it's presented to the Board of Ed each June, and it includes those three things there listed on the presentation: student enrollment projections, capital improvement plan strategies, and review of the school boundary options. And it's a very long process, as many of you know, and have actually participated in. This guide on the right comes from our budget office website. And so it kind of outlines the operating and capital budget process. And so it kicks off in the fall and pretty much ends in June. So it gets adopted in June. The school system, the Board of Education, submits its operating capital budget request to the county executive in March. Now that's based on the previous June's feasibility study. So the feasibility study really kind of starts the process, and then the operating capital budget request goes to the county executive the following March, about 9 months later. And then the county council and the county executive take that, they deliberate upon it. There's public hearings in April and May. In fact, there was a public hearing this morning on the capital budget. I'm not sure if it was schools or not, but so that's how that works. And then it finally gets adopted in June. So it's a fairly involved process and a lot of steps. So we sort of have to start back in June. So the following June is the adopted capital budget based on the feasibility report of the previous June, which takes into account the projections that were given to Howard County Public School System a few months before that. So in terms of sort of the details of the projections, the Howard County Public School System Office of School Planning develops the enrollment projections each year, and it includes those 5 or 6 factors. So it includes the number of births in Howard County, the 5-year history of cohort survival, kids going from one grade to the next, from one school to the next, from elementary, for example, to middle school. There's changes in those transitions. It also looks at first-time sales of newly constructed homes. So that's the information that DPZ, that my division, gives to the school planning office. It also looks at resales of existing homes. There tends to be, when a home is turned over, in some areas of the county, particular areas of the county that might have an older housing stock, you might see additional school children coming into those homes. So same with apartment turnover. And so it's trying to track new growth from resales and apartment turnover, and also out of district enrollment at regional programs. There's some regional programs that school children can choose to go to, so the projections include that as well. A little bit about APFO, Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. It was first adopted in Howard County in 1992, so it has a very long history. It's been changed over time with different county councils and county executives and various task force. So it's been adapted to the changing situation in Howard County and the changing general plan that occurred. So the 1990 plan recommended that an APFO be created. And so in 1992, the APFO was first adopted by the county council. And there's 3 tests, so-called tests, associated with APFO. One is housing unit allocations, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's basically an allocation of the housing unit. So we basically, what APFO does is it paces residential growth. And in the general plan that's currently adopted, there's a chart in there that basically says only so many units can be built per year in Howard County. And so the APFO is tied to that. And so the latest general plan, Plan Howard 2030, has a chart, which I'll show in a second, that paces growth. You can't have more than what's in that chart. And if more projects come in, then those projects get put on hold. The second test is the school capacity test. So once a project receives allocations, it takes this extra school capacity test. And if the school districts within which the project is located are over capacity, then the projects are placed on hold. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. And then the third test is the roads test. which doesn't stop growth or pause growth or delay growth. It basically says that the developer needs to mitigate the road impacts by building roads or expanding roads. I'm not going to talk about that during this presentation in further detail. So for allocations, I mentioned that an allocation is equal to a housing unit. Here's the chart that's in the general plan. There's these various areas in the county, these designated place types. You can see them listed there. There's downtown Columbia, growth and revitalization, established communities, green neighborhood, and rural west. They correspond to this map. And so there's certain numbers of housing units that can be built in each of the areas. So for example, the sort of the pink color is what's known as growth and revitalization. So that's areas where the policy of the general plan has said we want to concentrate growth in these areas, and there's redevelopment opportunities, for example, along the Route 1 corridor, the village centers, you see those various stars for each of the Columbia village centers, mixed use areas like Maple Lawn or Emerson or Turf Valley, and some areas along the Route 40 corridor. So those areas, since it's targeted growth, have the greatest number of allocations, about 1,200 a year. I think that's the case. Yeah, or it's actually reduced it to 1,000 in recent years. The brown area is the established communities. That's really where there's already established residential and commercial development, but there might be some infill opportunities. And so the numbers for that are 400 a year, a little bit less. So there's opportunities for more housing, but it's not per policy where we expect much of the growth to go. The rural west is the green shaded area. That's everything west of the planned service area boundary. And the planned service area boundary is the border between what's allowed to be on the water and sewer service system, the public water and sewer. And everything west of that is all well and septic. So it's low density residential development. And the allocations for that are 100 per year. Much of the land in the rural west is preserved through agricultural preservation and environmental easements. And there's not much room for growth left, but there's still, that's why it's 100 units per year in general. And then there's a few specialty areas. The green neighborhood that was established with the previous general plan, basically incentivizing developments that are considered green, so they have environmentally friendly design standards and building standards. So there's a special set aside for those units. And then also downtown Columbia, which has its own sort of pool. The downtown Columbia plan was adopted in 2010. And so part of that plan basically has, it's a 30-year plan with 6,200 housing units total. And so they do have allocations. They are subject to APFO, and you can see the phasing of those units there are a portion of the 6,200 in the first 15 years post when the Plan Howard 2030 was adopted. So this chart is subject to change. When the new general plan gets adopted, HoCo by design, there'll be a new chart that's going to set the new numbers, the new areas, and it's at this point it still hasn't been decided. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of think about how APFO is working and how we can perhaps change the way the allocation system works moving forward. And this group, we really appreciate your help to get your expertise and your insight and your experience to help us sort of think through this that could help potentially make recommendations, or will make recommendations for policies in the general plan as we move forward. The school capacity test, that takes place after allocations are received. The allocations test, it's good for schools, but the intent of it is also really to plan for all infrastructure. So if we know that there's only 2,000 houses that can be built in a year in Howard County, we could plan for, and we know that's the cap, then we can plan for water and sewer infrastructure, we can plan for parks and recreation, solid waste management. So these projections are given to all the agencies to help with that. Given schools is just much more complicated and important, and also a priority in Howard County, there's this extra school capacity test that was added as part of APFO. So even though if a project gets its allocations, it takes a school test, and if the school region and where the project's located is projected to be over capacity, then it's placed on hold. Now it can be placed on hold for up to 4 years, total of 5 tests. And then after that, that basically gives the county and the school system enough time to plan for, budget, and build, because it takes time to construct schools, new schools. So projects are placed on hold during that time period, and it gives the county foresight and the school system foresight into making sure that there's adequate capacity moving forward. If there's a 4-year max wait time, because you can't hold a project up forever. You can manage growth, but you can't stop growth, as we all know. So that's the way APFO works in Howard County. The percentages you see there, there's actually 4 tests that's part of the main test. So you can think of it as 4 subtests. So the elementary district has to be less than 105% projected capacity. The elementary school region has to be less than 105% capacity. A region is basically an aggregation of contiguous elementary districts. And there's like 6 to 10 elementary districts next to each other. And I think there's 6 or 8 school regions. So the school district has to be less than 105%, and then the region as a whole, less than 105%. And then the middle school district is less than 110%, that's the cutoff. And high schools was newly added with the APFO task force that was created. It started actually like around 2015, 2016. The law went into effect in 2018, and these reduced percentages, these percentages you see there were reduced in July 2019. It had been 115% for elementary schools and districts, and 115% for middle school, and there was no high school test. So you can see there it was reduced to 105 for elementary district and region, and 110 for middle school, and they added a high school test. So this was sort of a history of APFO in Howard County. I mentioned it started in 1995 or 1992. The first APFO year was 1995 because the way APFO is designed, it always looks 3 years ahead. So the way it works is when a project comes in, it gets tested when the initial plan gets approved. It typically takes about 3 years for a plan to move through all of the various plan stages, from sketch plan to preliminary plan to final plan to site development plan to build and construct the units, which takes time. So typically it's about 3 years. Could be sooner, could be longer, but and you can't control those things, but in general it's around 3 years. And so when they get allocations, we actually look at what the situation is 3 years in the future. So we plan for the three years further the units will be there, and how can we either allow the projects to move forward or put a pause on them if there's some crowding situation. So this first column shows all of the number of units in any given year since APFO began that have been on hold due to allocations. So for example, in 2008, there was 1,002 housing units, so plans with 1,002 units on them, and it could be apartment units, townhomes, single-family detached, came in. That was more than what was allowed on the allocation chart. And the allocation chart, by the way, and the schools charts get adopted by the county council each July. So we're about to pre-file this July. They're going to update the new charts. And again, the allocation chart is based on the general plan, but it's updated annually, and there's some rolling average provisions and things like that. And then the school chart is prepared by the Office of School Planning based on the projections, and it actually comes out of the feasibility study. So it's the last piece of the feasibility study I mentioned before, presented to the Board of Education, and that's tomorrow night, I think. I think Tim is going to present that tomorrow night. And then the Board of Education approves it or not. And then, and then it goes to the county council for adoption. So there's, going back to what I was saying, 1,000 allocations, 1,000 extra units came in than were allowed. So these were placed on hold at some point in 2008. So this sort of summarizes what's placed on hold. The next year they can move forward, but they're on hold temporarily, or maybe a portion of them would move forward. So that's what this represents. The school capacities totals represent units that were on hold based on failing the school capacity test. So the schools were closed, and so the units were thus on hold. So you can see the total units annually. About 22,000, total units were paused or placed on hold temporarily due to APFO, basically. You can see here, this is an important situation here. For the first time in the last 5 years, there's been no units on hold due to allocations. And there's various reasons for that. But the point is that allocations are not having a big of an impact as they used to. So the question arises, do we still want the allocation system? Is there a different type of system we can use? There are still units on hold due to schools, however. This is sort of a history of growth. This is the last 10 years or 20 years, last 20 years. The average units in this 10-year period, this was from Howard County, the 2000 general plan, about 1,500 units per year. And then the Plan Howard 2030 was adopted in 2012, actually. So this represents units built under that plan, the current plan. And you can see it's about the same, maybe a little higher. You see these spikes here. What's happening is, given the land use in Howard County and the policies implemented from the previous 2 general plans, there's more units that are apartment units and condos and townhomes and less single family detached. So you can kind of see that in the data. And when you build an apartment project, you might have a 200 unit building or a 300 unit building. So, but they don't happen every year, at least not in Howard County. And so you see these spikes that happen every once in a while. And then this chart shows the breakdown of unit type. So you can see that trend. The last 10 years, there was 42% apartment units, rental and condos, mostly rental, compared to 28% the previous year. And you can see the drop in single family detached too, from 42% to 31%. This is really the future, this situation. There's not, in fact, it looks more like 67 or 70% apartments over the next, if you look at the scenarios that we prepared that Matt mentioned, those scenarios include mostly apartments given the land use that's left in Howard County. So the current impacts of APFO. So I mentioned there was an APFO task force that that recommended changes. The law was amended in 2018 by the county council, and they added a high school test, and they reduced the school capacities from 115 to 105 for elementary and 115 to 110 for middle. This is the current adopted school chart. So you can see that one of the impacts of that is that a big portion of the county is closed to development. So these shaded areas represent high schools, middle schools, and elementary districts that are closed to development. So if a development were to come in today and get their initial plan approval, get their allocations, they may be placed on hold for up to 4 years, given the current situation. So what this chart shows here is looking really towards the future, based on and compares it to the past. So since 2010, you can see how many tentative allocations were actually granted. So how many housing units were granted through the APFO the ability to proceed, which end up on the ground. So you can see, the 1,500, 1,600 in this range. Currently, we're currently in the 2023 APFO year, based on the chart that was adopted in July 2020. So when the county council adopts the chart this July, in a few months, we'll be in the 2024 APFO year. The current APFO year, if you exclude downtown Columbia, which has its plan and is moving forward with their plan, the rest of Howard County, you can see the number of allocations granted has been reduced. It's less than what was there before. Furthermore, oftentimes in the past, we've seen these phased plans that move forward. So if you have a comprehensive plan that might have several hundred units, they're allowed to phase into the future. So they might go 50 this year, 50 next year, 50 the following year. So typically you might see units into the future. We're not seeing those now. So what's in the pipeline that will be getting allocations isn't that much. So we anticipate growth will slow into the future. And in large part, that has, the reason for that is probably manifold. One has to do with the stricter APFO. Two has to do with the amount of land left in Howard County really is running out, as Matt mentioned. So the opportunities for development is becoming less. And redevelopment isn't easy. And quite frankly, we did have redevelopment plans from the last general plan, but it's not happening really as quickly as we anticipated. So all those factors sort of combine to a slowing of growth. Some have also said that there was I'll talk a little bit about the finance aspect of things. The school surcharge was raised recently, and so some have indicated that's an impediment to building. But it's really hard to know. As we all know, there's a lot of factors that play into it. Housing demand is incredibly strong. So it's likely that those factors have a role, but it's not a simple, you can't just say this is the reason why. Another sort of leading indicator is this chart here and the next chart. In Howard County, all developers and builders are required to hold a pre-submission community meeting. It's a meeting that they hold with the neighbors and the community where they want to propose a development. So even before they submit a subdivision plan to DPZ, they hold this meeting. They let people know what the plans are and that they plan to submit a development to DPZ. It's a way to let the community know, and also to let the community know that the plan was submitted, so they can have input and they can have dialogue with it to get a it's basically a good way to communicate and a good way to work well with a developer to come up with a good product at the end. Particularly when you have infill development, it can be contentious. So if you look at the history, since this was first required back in 27, there's an average of about 24 of these meetings every 6 months. The last 18 months, so the last 3 6-month periods, have only been 7, 4, and 6. So you can see a drop off. And this was when the amended APFO was effective, where the school capacities were reduced to 105%, and when the large portion of the county was closed due to schools. So there is sort of a correlation there, you can see. This is the same chart, but it's based on the number of housing units in those plans. So they might have a meeting and they might say, I'm going to build 20 units here. So this is a sum of all of what they're planning. And you can see an average of 6 months, every 6 months was about 750, which makes sense because we've been building about 1,500 units per year. And now you can see these are the units in those plans. So it's not a lot of units moving forward. So they have up to a year to bring in subdivision plans with these units. So this really is an indication that growth is slowing in Howard County. Downtown Columbia is going strong, and we always anticipated growth there. But the rest of Howard County, the next, the immediate, probably the next 2 3 years, it's going to be strong numbers of units built because there's still a fair amount in the pipeline. But starting, 23, 24, 25, we very well will likely see this reduction. So we put this together, and I'm going to get into this. I'm going to show this very briefly and then let Tim talk about sources of student growth. We wanted to put this together to really come up with a correlation between school districts and their capacities and where new development is occurring. So this is an interactive application, and hopefully it will work. I just pulled it up. It's thinking right now. Okay, so what this does is it takes a look, for example, in 2018, so the fall of 2018, this was the capacity utilization. So the actual enrollment this is the actual enrollment of September 30th for that year, 2018. what was the utilization? How many, what percentage utilized was each of the 40 plus elementary schools? So my elementary schools right now. The colors are, this green color here is below the 90%. So the school system policy is the optimal school is between 90 and 110%. So the school system policy indicates that between 90 and 110% is how we want to target our school utilization. And that's the orange here. So this is between 90 and 110%. Overcapacity or overutilized are these yellow colors right here. So you can see there's a fair amount of schools that have capacity problems and that are overcrowded in 2018. What this also does, it compares the bars represent this, the dotted bars represent building, so new homes. So each of the last 3 years, so it's a sum of all homes built over the previous 3 years. We wanted to do 3 years because it just shows the activity prior, 3 years prior to the 2018 year. Sometimes it takes a while for people to move into apartments, et cetera. So the 3 years is a good amount of construction. And you can see in some areas, like downtown Columbia, there's a lot of construction. That's where Brennybrook is. But the capacity utilization is 80%. So sometimes you have building that happens, but it doesn't impact the utilization of the school. It depends on the type of unit. We're seeing, for example, in downtown Columbia, the types of units, there's a lot of one bedrooms and a lot of studios. They're not generating a lot of school children. And the folks that are moving into those units tend to be, older empty nesters, or it could be younger millennials that don't have children. So it really depends on the county of how building impacts schools. In some places it does impact it. We have 497 units in Fulton, for example, and Fulton is overcrowded. We have some places that are very crowded and there's no units being built in parts of downtown Columbia. So that's 2018, and then 2019, you can see the same thing. And we'll share this with you so you can sort of play around with it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. And this is the overall utilization of elementary schools in 2019. So elementary schools are at capacity. So we will need new elementary schools, no doubt, moving forward. Interestingly, in 2020, the utilization dropped because of COVID, where some students left the system to do homeschooling or private schools. Of course, the school buildings weren't being utilized, but we have full expectations that all those students will be coming back, or most of them will be coming back. So it's really not a good year to look at. Probably 2019 is a better year to look at. So you have elementary schools, high schools look like this. We all know that Howard is a problem, and Long Reach. And you can see a lot of the units built in Long Reach, so that contributes to the crowding in that case. Howard, there's really not any units, hardly any units built in Howard. It's crowded just because of, I don't know, Tim can talk about that. So that's this chart. And so we'll share this with you. And we find it, we think it's a good way to sort of to compare building with capacity utilization. And with that, I think what I will do is, Tim, if you want, I can pull up the next slides if you would like to speak up those.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest thing, Jeff.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Tim Rogers, Office of School Planning. Thanks, Jeff, for taking us this far through the presentation and giving me the opportunity to fill the group in on some of this information. So this is student growth. We're projecting, every year we've been projecting student enrollment to increase, and it has increased to the tune of 700 to 900 students a year over the last 10 years. These charts just show the sources of some of that increase, and it shows the numbers indicate new students, the net impact of new students to each school. So if we look at 2019 at the elementary level, apartment turnover yielded 533 students new to their school. Resales of existing homes yielded 417 students. and new construction yielded 256 students new to their school for school year 2019-20. And this is September 30th official enrollment data. And then you can see the breakdown by percentage of new students added. These are numbers that get talked about in the community a lot, and there's been a lot of discussion around whether resales or new construction add the most new students to a school. And you can see, it's definitely resales. And apartment turnover has a big part to play too, especially as a couple slides ago Jeff showed the types of units that are being built more frequently in the county, being apartments and condos and multifamily housing. We'll see a bigger share of apartment turnover contributing to student generation. A couple of notes to go with this. Resales, we pull data from the MDP sales database in November to capture all the sales through September 30th of each year. New constructions based on building permit data. So we get all the permits that have been issued, that's building permits and use and occupancy permits from DPZ as well. The county-wide new construction yield rates can vary. So as we start comparing the students yielded to the number of units that were open in any given year, the location within the county, the types of units that are being built. So, some of the newer apartments that are and multifamily housing that are coming in have fewer bedrooms, and like Jeff mentioned, are becoming attractive to empty nesters or younger couples without students yet. So that impacts the yield rates. We also want to mention that sometimes the timing of permit issuance and occupancy from a sale can impact these numbers. So we've had situations before where maybe the permits are issued for an apartment building, it can be occupied. However, the whole building doesn't lease all at the same time. So while the permits show up in 2019, for instance, it may take till 2020 or even 2021 to get a sense for all the students that moved into those new apartments for the first time. So that it's not a big factor, but it's worth mentioning, especially when we're talking about larger apartment projects. I think that's it for this one, Jeff.
Okay, we move on to the next.
Yeah.
Yep.
So every year we project enrollment and we look at enrollment in terms of capacity utilization. So 2020 was an odd year, obviously because of COVID. We overshot our projection, or we over projected enrollment by a decent amount due to the students that families that chose to withdraw students to go to private schools and to do homeschooling. This past year, it was around 1,600 students that we expected to enroll to be in HCPSS the 2020 school year that didn't show up. So that 56,165 is a bit lower than what was projected. The capacity is calculated as a result of formulas adopted by the board. We last reviewed capacities at each level, high schools in 2009, I believe, middle schools in 2012, and elementaries in 2013. And the board, we work with consultants on all three levels. The board approved the methodology, and basically it counts the number of rooms in a school that meet the criteria to be a teaching station, and then applies a student to teacher ratio to those rooms to get to the capacity of the school. We do update them as buildings are modified, as programming in buildings is modified. We don't update all of them every year, but we do update as needed. And those updates are typically presented in the feasibility study each year. Then the capacity utilization is important. It plays into the APFO calculation, as well as just helping us understand how many seats are needed at each school and the utilization of each school building. So you can see at the elementary level last year, mostly again because of COVID's a footnote to these numbers. We ended up being underutilized, not underutilized. It's still 95% is still within our target utilization, but the lower utilization, lower end of the scale at elementary, middle and high schools are going to need seats going forward. And that capacity utilization, I want to make sure I said everything I wrote in my notes. Yep. Oh, I also wanted to mention that these capacity utilization numbers will be presented in the feasibility study, and our projections for next year look like we'll have 48, around 48 schools within the target utilization range, which is 90 to 110%. That's defined by policy 6010. Thanks, Jeff. Can we go to the next one?
Okay.
So in the board requested long-range master plan, part of the capital budget, which Jeff mentioned is in process right now. There are 3 projects that are underway. Talbot Springs replacement, which will add a few seats to the Eastern Columbia region at the elementary level. New High School 13 is in process, which will add 1,658 needed seats in the southeast region of the county. And Hammond High School is also receiving a 200-seat addition, and along with the complete renovation of the building. So those 3 projects are underway, and will add seats in regions where we need them, where capacity utilization is high, and many of which are shown on the map Jeff showed us a few slides ago, depicting that they're closed for development due to APFO right now. In the future, we're looking at a 43rd elementary school in the southeast. The exact location has yet to be determined, but there are a few site options there. We're looking at 788 seats for that school to accommodate recent elementary growth and future growth in that area. Many of you probably know Laurel Park has been developing. The milk producers property, now known as Wellington Farms, has been is ready to go. And then also we've had other recent development in that area, from Maple Lawn over to Wincopia Farms. So our southeast region elementary schools are becoming stretched, and that's why we are projecting the school to be needed there. Also on this plan, Oakland Mills renovation addition. There's a need for middle school seats as well in the eastern portion of the county. Our strategy for middle school seats, there's more detail on this in the feasibility study, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about it at any point. But our strategy for middle schools has been to strategically add seats onto existing buildings rather than build new middle schools. So the Oakland Mills Middle School is in need of a renovation. So we're planning to add seats onto it in that renovation. It's towards the end of the long range plan. So it'll be a few years before that gets started. And even though we're building high school number 13 in the southeast, we're still going to need high school seats going forward. So Centennial High School, again, in need of a renovation. So we're looking at attaching 340 or so seats to that school in conjunction with the renovation. We're projecting a need for a 44th high school. As of this plan, it's in downtown Columbia, and a 14th high school at some point in the future. Again, the year to be determined, probably the mid 2030s would be what we're looking at there. And again, just the 1,658 seats following the high school 13 model.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is the last slide. There's one more slide after this as a concluding slide, but this is the last slide. A little to talk about financing. As you all know, school construction is the most expensive part of the debt service for Howard County. Schools are expensive, and we need a lot of schools. So what this shows is that for the FY21 debt service approved budget, The school construction bonds, which are general obligation bonds, amount to about 46 million. Debt service. So that's debt service to pay those bonds for that year. And then the school surcharge bonds amount to 6.5 million. School surcharge is money that's collected at time of building permit of new residential development. It had been, I mentioned this earlier, it had been $1.32 per square foot, raised recently to $7.50 a square foot, phased over several years. This year, it's actually, I think, $6.50 or $5.50. It's on its way up. It'll reach the $7.50 per square foot level in this upcoming January. So that will raise a lot of needed revenues moving forward. But between the two, it's about 43%. Here's the other capital debt service spending in the county from general obligation bonds, just for informational purposes, and the road excise bonds. So the total operating budget's about 1.2 billion, and 10.4% of that is on debt service. The Spending Affordability Committee recently met, and that's really the beginning of the budget process. And Ellen is very familiar with this. So they advise that no more than 10% of the operating budget be spent on debt, or to pay back debt. And that's really a standard. It's really a best practices. And so Howard County has reached that level. So this is just to say there's a lot of capital needs, and we don't have a lot of capital spending potential left. So it's always very challenging. It's always a lot of needs competing between different agencies, et cetera. The increased school charge will help for sure. A fiscal impact study was conducted as part of the scenarios, and the details of that are on the HoCo by Design webpage. And this basically shows the various scenarios. These are possible futures, and there's 4 different possible futures. And you can see the net fiscal impact is positive for each, and the greater the growth. So the way this sort of work is, scenario A is the trends, sort of what we're expecting moving forward based on current land use. And that's about 18,000 housing units left for the next 20 years. Scenarios B, C, and D increase those levels and also have different locations of where these units can be. Are they concentrated in activity centers? Are they in Columbia Gateway? Things of that nature. So we did fiscal impacts of all the scenarios. It also includes non-residential, commercial, office and industrial land and retail as well. But new growth in Howard County generally pays for itself. What that means is that the revenues generated through property tax and income tax and other revenues, school surcharge, road excise tax, et cetera, are more than enough to pay for the service costs, including operating costs and debt service. The main reason for that is because of the local income tax. Maryland is unique in the country. I think there's only a few other states that collect local income tax at the county level by place of residence. So, residences generate a fair amount of income to pay for the services. That's opposed to other places, like, for example, in Arizona, Maricopa County, for example, most of their local revenues, their county revenues, are from retail sales tax. And they do have a property tax, but it's not high, and they have no local income tax. So for the fiscal structure in a county such as that is they need the retail space to pay for services. In Maryland, the fiscal impacts are such that residences do a pretty good job to pay for themselves. And there's been multiple fiscal studies done in counties adjacent to Howard County, Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, et cetera, from different economic consultants that have shown the same pattern here. So it's important to know that growth isn't a drain on the budget. It actually helps the budget. On the downside, of course, is that this has sort of been built into the fiscal structure of the county. It's like you're depending on the growth. It's built in, right? You're expecting X amount of school surcharge from new development. When that stops and that money doesn't come in, then that creates sort of structural problems. So that's one of the challenges moving forward, is to make sure there's enough growth and the timing of growth so that the budget works and capital facilities can be built. So on the one hand, new construction does add school children, but on the other hand, it also provides revenues to pay for additions, et cetera. And so that's why we kind of talked about this three-legged stool, and that's the conclusion of the paper that we put together. So you really need three things to make things work well. You know, you need planning, good planning and an APFO. You need a general plan. You need an APFO that manages growth. You can't have growth just come whenever it wants. You have to kind of manage it. We learned that back in the 80s when we had all this housing and there was huge school problems. So that's why the APFO was created in the first place. You also need funding in school construction and planning moving forward. You got to add the capacity in a managed, planned way. And then, of course, redistricting is important too. As capacity is available in other schools, you want to use that system-wide capacity because schools are expensive, and you want to, use your capital dollars wisely and your school resources wisely. So obviously, if one of those things is not working, if one of the legs is broken, the stool collapses. That was the analogy used in the report. I like this analogy better that somebody told me once about something different, not school planning, but imagine this three-legged stool on a ship on an ocean. So you're sitting on this stool on the deck of a large ship going across the ocean, and the seas are stormy. So the deck of the ship is kind of rotating, so you're sitting on the stool trying to balance, and sometimes you're teetering on redistricting, and that sort of solves the problem. Sometimes you're teetering on planning and APFO, and that solves the problem. And sometimes, you have extra funding or school construction. Sometimes it's on two of the legs. But basically, you really need all three at one point or the other for things to work, in rocky seas as the ship moves forward. So anyway, so that's the summary of the presentation. And now the next is we'd be glad to take your questions about the presentation or anything else moving forward. Thank you. So I guess we can first, you want to, Brian, first talk about questions about this particular presentation, or open it up for questions?
I think let's start there, and please don't be shy. We've spent more than half of our time talking at you, so we want to hear from you now.
And it's a lot to absorb. We know that for sure, too.
Larry.
We're not going to be tested on this, are we?
No tests tonight. Maybe next meeting. We'll see.
And I know this is thinking outside the box a little bit, has the pandemic changed anything? For example, with people now working at home, is it possible that business buildings are going to close, which might become apartments, might become schools? I mean, I'm really thinking outside. I mean, is there any thought that that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. And Matt, maybe you can chime in on that as well, because you've been, I know, looking at that question from a national perspective, and I don't know if we have the answer yet, but I've heard all those things, Larry, that you mentioned, that yes, if office space is not as much as of a demand, how will future office space be used? Will they turn into apartments and things like that? So, I don't know, Matt, if you have any new insight on that, that would be helpful.
Right.
I'll just be very short. Larry, and the most honest answer I can give you is we don't know, right? Depending which week we read the news articles, either everyone's staying home or they're being called back, or, we just don't know yet right now.
Right.
But because of the situation the county's in with little land, we're looking at all options. Even, personally from the outside, we're looking at even the other assets the school board has, can it put an office building somewhere or an administrative building somewhere else? Can it, what's there? Like, what can we do? So we are putting all options on the table, and we would encourage all of you to keep pushing us on it. But sometimes planning for the unknown is tricky, and in COVID, it's even trickier. So we just have to have eyes wide open and kind of watch where things are going. It looks like September is a good chance to check in again. It seems like a lot of places are either going to have you come back or not in the fall.
Right.
We'll watch that a little bit as well, but it's a good comment, and we are looking at it.
Okay.
Hi,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go
uh,
ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Wood.
Hi, I have a question about Table 5 and Table 6. From the tables, I can see that we have more new students from resale compared with new construction. So my question is, do we have the data about the total number of resales and total number of new constructions, so we can see the ratio of students versus number of units for each of the category?
Yes, that's a very good question, and we do have that. So we have the number of units built per year, and as Tim mentioned, he gets a data set from the Maryland Department of Planning that calculates annual resales. So we can certainly provide that to you.
Thank you. And also, what would be the potential short-term and long-term impact of COVID on the apartment turnover, resale, and new construction? I know that you will need to follow up on data, but based on the data we have up to 2021, have you detected any trend?
Yeah, that's Tim, did you mention at one point, so you're expecting the students that decided to homeschool or go to private schools, didn't the school system do a survey to try to come to an understanding of whether those children would be coming back when schools open back up again when COVID is finished?
Yeah, we did, and we also spent a lot of time talking to other jurisdictions around the state and outside the state as well. And we're predicting that at least 80% of the students that withdrew at the beginning of the school year will return for next year. So we built that into the projections for next year and beyond. As far as different housing types, I think I think we probably all have a guess maybe, but it'll take, as we gather data over the next year, and especially over the summer, which is when most of the housing transactions occur, we'll know more about that in the fall in terms of, are we going to see more students from apartment turnover? Are we going to see, were the resales there this year like they were in the previous years? Or new houses being built, and were people moving into new houses with school-age children in the last year like they were in previous years? So I think we'll need to get that full data set to really know for sure.
Thank you. And
Sure.
another question about those two tables are, so I saw that there are 2 years of data. So do you look at the whole school year or the whole calendar year? And if a student first stay in an apartment and then later, because of the resale of the house, they moved into a single family house, will they be counted twice or they only count once in the table?
Yeah, they're only counted once, and it's about where they live on September 30th of each school year.
Thank you.
That's how they're counted.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Sure.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Everyone's being bashful.
No, I'll try one. On those projections, Tim, for 80% return, are you including those who are opting to remain digital in the coming year?
Yeah, the projection, the enrollment projection was done in February, and we didn't know much about the offerings of the Digital Education Center at that time. So the projection that was done in February took into account what we knew at the time. And at that time, the Digital Education Center, I think, was just an idea.
Okay, and then the options that have been introduced at the high school level for off-campus opportunities, both in technical training as well as at HCC and dual enrollment things.
Mm-hmm.
Have we re-examined that impact on what that's going to mean about high school capacities? Or are we still, I know these are all evolving things,
Mm-hmm.
but the state is looking at 40% for their apprenticeship Maryland, and I'm just wondering if we started looking at that, as well as the changes in the student-teacher ratios and the way in which the way in which planning offsets specials and things like that. I'm just wondering, when did we last look at some of those things?
Well, those are all great questions, and some programs that honestly I'm not that familiar with, but I can ask around and find out more about them. You know, what we're projecting is student enrollment. So if they're dual enrolled at HCC, if they're taking classes at ARL, if they're in some sort of apprenticeship program, as long as they're still enrolled in an HCPSS school, whether they only attend there part-time or they just enroll at their home school but take classes somewhere else, you know, that's still factored into our projection. So,
but in terms of actual utilization, it makes a difference. And the same with the change that students used to have to take a full credit load in their senior year. They don't have to anymore. And so that means that changes. And then we don't count, obviously, the pre-K students. So there's another piece that's just kind of missing when we try and get the whole impact, because the 788 school does not include the 125 for pre-K or something.
Correct.
But those are things that have to take place at the state in a way to make some of this make sense. But I just wondered, are we factoring the fact that some of these enrollments are not full-time enrollments? Do we want to look at something that's more like an FTE? And that might impact how we look at utilization and capacity.
Yeah, I think a lot of the programs you're mentioning, what they essentially mean is there are fewer students in the building. They're still enrolled there.
Yeah.
And you know, changes in those programs could result in them ending up back at their home school. So we still want to count them at their home school. So yeah,
well,
but
we're getting money for them.
It's fewer students actually in the building on a day-to-day basis. That's true.
Yeah, well, we're getting state funding for them. So yeah, we have to count. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I think I saw Michael Bayer getting ready to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to make a couple comments, just I guess mainly for informational purposes, kind of tying this to what's happening at the state level. So it was just about a week and a half ago that we sent out our enrollment projections. We're still in the process of receiving them back from all the LEAs and getting that information. I think it's been our assumption going in that we are anticipating seeing some impacts from COVID, similar to what you've described here. So it'll be interesting to see that statewide. What we've asked for as part of the educational facility master plans is that if there's been any local analysis done, that be submitted, just so that we can actually take a look at that and dig down deep, because all of our projection data really is at the county level. And so we're really reliant upon the LEAs and their analysis to kind of plug in and understand what's happening more within grade levels and ages, and also within areas of the county. So all that information is really useful for us, and I think it will be interesting for me personally and professionally to be a part of this conversation as it moves forward relative to those questions. I will say also that as part of the IAC process, later on in the year, when the CIP submissions are made, we are also anticipating looking closely at project requests as it relates to these enrollment data. So that's something that happens later on in the cycle. We're really just kind of starting it right now. We haven't even received the EF&Ps yet, but there's a lot of analysis that goes on. And as we move forward, I can definitely talk about some of the new things that are happening at the IAC level in terms of analysis and measures such as total cost of ownership and things that are also being used as tools to evaluate projects, and talk about how that might plug into what is being proposed here. So very interesting and obviously very timely. And also there's a lot of still uncertainties about this as well. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Any other comments or questions about the presentation? Going once. Okay.
So I guess I could just point out that everything that was presented here was in the document that you were sent on Friday. So if you're able to maybe take a closer look at it, you know, between now and our next meeting, we would love to hear your feedback in terms of anything that you might agree with or disagree with, or it will eventually, when we do a report out from this committee, we'd like to include that and make sure that, you know, everybody kind of concurs with that data. So we appreciate if you could take a look at it when you have some more time. That's all.
Thank you, Amy. Matt, can you trade me in again for presenter? Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Tim, so much. Really appreciate the presentation.
Sure.
Should be good to go, Brian.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our time together. I wanted to talk a little bit about the topics that we plan to cover with the SAG. Of course, you just heard that great presentation from our colleagues, and it covered essentially all 8 of these topic areas: roles and responsibilities and process as it relates to school planning and growth, sources of student growth, school site identification, including the land bank and school reservation process, future redistricting, APFO, school capacity utilization and projections, long-range capital planning and financing, and one of the topics that we really didn't get into in depth tonight yet is school prototypes, specifically the design of the school building itself or the school site. The following areas, where you see one of these wonderful magnifying glasses, are the areas that we think really fit a general plan. These are the areas that a general plan might address, including our current process. So these are the areas where we expect that this group will really drill down. Though there are plenty of other topics that we can talk about, and we probably will talk about, we do want to make sure that we get your feedback specifically as it relates to the roles, responsibilities, and process, the school site identification issue, land banking and the reservation process, and school prototypes. These are the sort of focus areas where we think you can make the biggest impact as we move forward in this process. With that, I'd like to again open it up to comments and questions and ask you, is there additional data that you all want to dig into that we haven't already discussed that you think would better inform this process and help you to make you know, better recommendations and better findings that we can then report back to the public and to the PAC for their consideration? So let me back up one slide and see if there's additional comments or thoughts.
And I guess, I know, while folks are just kind of noodling on this a little bit, I guess I just want to maybe talk a little bit more about some of these areas. So that, I mean, the general plan is a 20-year plan. So I know there's a lot of uncertainty in the near term with COVID, but this is a long-term planning exercise. So we're really trying to think about, you know, how do we make process improvements? How do we look at perhaps coordination between the county and the school district to make longer-term changes that would, you know, positively improve or impact the process? So, you know, with the roles and responsibilities, some of that is are there ways to better coordinate how we work with the school district to identify locations for schools, for how we plan for school capacity, et cetera. I think, like with school site identification, we have a school reservation process right now, And we'll get into that at a later meeting, but it hasn't really, other than Turf Valley, it's not been used. And I think we can identify some functional issues with the way it works. And so part of what this group might be able to do is help us think about a better process or a different point in the process where land could be identified for school sites. And then looking at maybe the land bank and how the land bank can be tied to the general plan and areas that we identify for any future growth in the general plan. How does that all, tie into each other? And then there's obviously the prototype topic comes into play, because right now we tend to have a prototype that may not be sustainable in the future, given the very scarce amount of land left in the county. So one of the things we would love to do, and I think Michael has offered to assist, is talk about maybe other prototypes that are available to us at the state level. How do we go about, requesting that or suggesting that? And so, that's another conversation we thought would be helpful to kind of dig into. And I think that obviously, APFO will probably come up through this course of these conversations. I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that there will be, after the general plan is adopted, there will be an APFO committee that is formed to make recommendations and kind of guide an APFO update. And so to the extent this committee has recommendations for what that specific APFO committee might want to look at, that may be helpful too. But obviously taking a deep dive into APFO, we would need way more than the 3 meetings that we have left to do something like that. So anyway, just trying to kind of throw out there what some of our thinking was for this committee. And I didn't get a chance to say, but I really, really appreciate everyone's time serving on this. This has been a really difficult issue for us with the HoCo by Design effort. And so we're hoping that we can just tap into your expertise to help make some solid recommendations on this. So,
Amy?
Yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say, if anyone has any thoughts about it, I'd love to hear it.
I guess one of the things that in our uncertainty and looking at various prototypes and instructional models and what kinds of return there might be and impact with hybrid, I mean, generally most people acknowledge that our new normal is going to not be what we had. It is going to be something else, and trying to judge how that works in an instructional environment as well as in a retail or commercial environment is something everybody's going to be wrestling with. But I think if we're going to understand how we move from what we're currently doing to considering new prototypes, is to understand as much as we can about how school design capacity is already determined and what might be the impact of the various scenarios that are, floating around out there, so that because it's a little bit archaic, it's a little bit arcane, people don't really understand how those numbers are come up with. And when we have student bodies that are not counted in the capacity, but the capacity is separate, and some of these are half-day programs, some of these are full day. So just to maybe help people get a better understanding of what goes into the determination of design capacity, and then what might be the impact, so you can better assess a prototype. Because every county doesn't do it the same way, and the state doesn't have a norm for what this means. But to be able to understand what we're currently doing and the thinking behind that, and then as we evaluate what might be considerations that might change the way we might apply that in a new prototype, that might help. I just don't know what that data exactly look like.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, I was going to just chime in on prototypes briefly, if that's okay, Amy.
Please.
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about a general plan, I mean, you're just to talk about school prototypes is already a pretty deep dive,
Yeah.
But it's but I also think it's worth, to the extent that a general plan can be a guide for the community for many years to come, it's worth having a discussion of those different types of prototypes I know for one of the conferences, I learned about a situation where there was a library being built in San Diego, and they didn't have the funds to complete the project the way they had originally hoped because of some other add-ons and things that happened. So they actually brought a high school program into the building, and were able to combine the capital projects and relieve high school capacity. So those types of out-of-the-box thinking, I think, are worth having there. I mean, not to say that HCPSS has to go do these things, but I think, finding ways to fit them in, or maybe if it's even just being able to relieve a school of a program by having it in some other type of location so that there's more classroom capacity within the building.
Can I add on to that?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, please.
The other thing that's changed is the way in which we construct buildings, and whether we need to be looking in Howard County at 50 to 90 year brick and block, or do we need to look at modular construction, which can be more rapidly deployed but still meet requirements, as was done in PG County, and what that means about how we plan and how we utilize capacity. Where you don't have to have a 20 or 30 year bond, you might be able to fund that a little bit differently, and that gives you some options. It doesn't mean relocatable necessarily, but it means, taking advantage of changes in construction techniques and in what's been approved as appropriate for educational environments, and make it more flexible. And does that give us different options? So it's, I just think the way in which we've done things in the past teaches us a lot, but we've been forced by COVID to address some things that just may not be practical going forward, and that we have to be prepared to look at what that new model is going to look like. So any of those things that help us understand, not defining what it is, but talking vertical versus horizontal, talking about combining things, a library and a school, looking at things that are a little bit different, that to me, in an area where we're going to see growth differently. I mean, we're looking at 2.2% growth, 1.5% inflation. That's not income that allows us to do a whole lot. So I'm just tossing that out.
Well, Ellen, I'll jump in there and let's add financing to that mix as well. Prince George's County looked at PPP financing for their building. So that's another element to look at. So, everything involved in school construction could be reimagined to look at the future and look at that number where we may not have it in bonds or the general fund to do it. So, that's one thing. I'm also glad you're looking at school site identification, because I think we are still slow to the draw. And as was mentioned in the presentation, I know Ellen and I have heard this before, there's not a whole lot of land left. I remember the debate over whether or not to put High School 13 where it was put. And the one thing that those who were against it, the answer was, okay, where are we going to put something this big in this county right now? And there was no answer because it doesn't exist. So, I think we need to be more aggressive as far as that. Also, the prototypes. I think I read an article about I want to say it was in Virginia, but it might be somewhere else. They took an office building and converted it into a school, and it worked. So, getting out of that box is a good idea. And especially, just very quickly, I'll stop here, Larry, to answer your question about what does private industry going to do post-COVID. I put on my day job hat as a real estate manager for my company, and we don't know. We're looking at all kinds of things from hybrid model, hoteling. The only thing that I think most experts in the corporate real estate market will tell you is we're going to be smaller going forward. We're not going to buy that 150,000 square foot building or lease it for 10 years anymore. It's going to be 50,000 square feet, and we'll do hoteling or hybrid to make it work. So, demand for commercial space is going to go down in some way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of how much. So, leveraging that might be another opportunity for the county from an education standpoint.
But Steve, you're right. If everybody's having to reassess how they're moving space, using space and what they'll need and what that's going to look like, then that we have to do the same thing as we look at schools. Nobody's left out of this. Where are we going and what are we going to do and what it's going to look like in 20 years?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Additional thoughts, outside of the box thinking, other questions we should be asking?
I just wanted to echo what everyone was saying about school prototypes. I think that's really exciting opportunity. And I think if we could have more examples, we can certainly go out and look on our own. But if there are best practices in a planning and zoning world of where they've done creative use of school prototypes, I think I would be interested in seeing and hearing about those.
The other thing I was going to throw out there, just kind of coming at it more from the land use planning side is, or at least from APFO, is that I've seen traffic signals that were constructed with money from a combination of public and private sources because different developments had a commitment that they were required to provide because of their APF requirement. And so I know that most of us are familiar with Columbia and may understand that large planned community provided 10-acre school sites, even larger ones, right out of the cloth of the plan. And that doesn't seem very likely today, but it might be possible to piece together a site with some kind of, some kind of future APFO that would allow for contributions. Now, I realize Jeff in his presentation made it very clear about the new funding sources that are set up with APFO, with the property tax. But it's just something to think about, is that we might not want to seed that we'll never get a new site out of a development, because many developers do want to have a school as a part of their community. So it might be something that we certainly don't want to let go of that opportunity.
Thank you, Joel.
Well, as we did with Hanover Hills and tried to, and Thomas Viaduct.
Just to add a couple things from the state perspective, I would say that we're very aware at the IC that there's not enough resource to go around. So I think everybody's in the same situation where we need to right size buildings relative to resources and relative to need. So in addition to prototypes, as I think was said earlier, sometimes that's a little bit lower in terms of an option. What we have been looking more and more at, and I anticipate that will be more and more built into the process, is what I mentioned, the total cost of ownership. And so what we're trying to do is create some parameters within which, given the gross area baselines that are eligible for each project, what is a creative solution within an area to do a project. And so we're trying to encourage that while also recognizing that we're trying to both maximize or optimize the design and also acknowledge the operating and maintenance costs moving forward, and accounting for all of that and making that information available so that as alternatives are actually weighed at the local level, all of that information is available and people can take both a short-term and a long-term view, because again, every square foot that's built ultimately needs to be operated and maintained, and that adds to your bill. And so to the extent that we're building out these tools and are utilizing them and applying them to projects, I think looking at through that kind of lens is useful, because again, it's based on the same goal and problem and challenge that you're talking about, which is we don't have enough money to go around. How can we make the most efficient use of it, not only today, but in the future? So to the extent we talk about that later on, I can bring some other folks in to talk about how we're looking at that at the state level.
Thank you, Michael. Other thoughts? Got about 8 minutes till we're up on our time this evening.
I'll throw one more out. Try to beat Ellen for the most talking. But the one thought I've had recently is, how much of retail has converted to direct, Amazon, that kind of thing. And retail sites, we've already seen this in Howard County, can be redeveloped into mixed use communities. So, that might be where the opportunities lie for future school sites. It may not be like an open greenfield site. It might actually be the redevelopment of a shopping plaza or something like that as our needs change. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Joel. All right. Is there any additional data that we think we need? I just want to make sure that we don't walk away from tonight without our homework on our end.
Yeah, hi, this is Yun. I have a follow-up question about table 5 and 6. So based on what I'm hearing, a student will come twice based on their home status in September. So my question is, if a family, they were waiting for building a new house, so they rent an apartment first, and when next year, if they move into a new house, will the students still be counted as new student, or they will not be counted again as new enrollment? They will be counted as existing enrollment.
I think that's a question for Tim.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. Dr. Liu, that's a very specific scenario, but I think it's one that happens in the county, and it would depend on whether that student changes schools between the apartment and the new home where they live on September 30th when the school year begins. So if they're in an apartment for one school year in one school district, and then the next school year they move to an apartment, a single family home that's new in a different school district, they'll be counted for the purposes of the data that was reported in this presentation as a new student at that school because of new construction. So it kind of depends on the combination of where they are on September 30th of each year and whether they're changing school districts when they change from the apartment to the new single family home in that situation. Yeah, sure. If you have other specific examples like that, feel free to email us and we can try to answer them.
Yeah, sure. The reason why I'm asking this question is because when I look at the table, obviously for elementary school, apartment consists of a very large percent of new enrollment. So I'm just wondering whether that contributes partly because families are waiting to move into resale or new construction, and then probably the new construction or the resale may be underestimated. If that's the case, if you can provide data about the new enrollment from apartment, how many of them later moved into resale house or new construction? That'd be very helpful. Because then we will know how many of them actually, because they want to move into a new house and want to move into a resale house just because the house is not ready, so they rent and wait for it. So that will provide more accurate estimate about the impact of new construction on school enrollment.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. I think that's something we could look at.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments before we close it up with a quick discussion about our future meetings? All right. I'm hearing none. So the big question is, we've got 3 known meetings and then a possible 4th meeting. Is this a good time generally to meet? It appeared from our doodle poll that this was about the best time we were going to get, but I wanted to confirm with the group. 5 to 7 p.m.
The only date that threw me was the Friday, July 9th, since we had Mondays and then we had the lone Friday evening.
Yeah, and this got bumped because of the 4th of July holiday. And we were trying to find another time that week that wouldn't be sort of just coming right off of the holiday and expecting people to be ready to rock and roll.
But people take that week that has the holiday in it, so it just depends.
Or I was curious if we might be able to switch it to earlier, or just not a 5 to 7 on a Friday night.
Understand. Yeah. Okay. Let's take that back. Does July 9th work for folks if it's earlier in the day? Generally? I see one thumbs up. Okay, we'll do a doodle poll for some daytime slots on the 9th. See if we can find something earlier.
Yeah, I have a meeting until 4 p.m. on Fridays.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other than that, we will take those Mondays from 5 to 7, and we'll pencil those in, and we'll make sure you all get calendar invites for those meetings. All right. And if it wasn't made abundantly clear at the beginning of the call, one of the reasons that we face a challenge in our growth in the future here is that we have fantastic public schools here in Howard County, which really puts us in demand. And that wouldn't be possible without the hard work of our school board members and folks like yourselves and our staff at the school system that are working so hard to make those schools high quality. So we want to thank you all for your participation. We want to thank you for your time and for your comments, and we look forward to working with you for the next few meetings as we move this process along. In the meantime, if you need anything from us, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself at bschefter@howardcountymd.gov or Matt directly at matt.noonkester@cityexplained.com. Thank you again for your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
My pleasure.